If it's Johnny Manziel, which I've seen. I was watching the QB stories with Mahomes and Kirk Cousins and Mariota last night because I don't sleep, so I was watching some of that. I just find that anytime you can go behind the scenes in sports and show who these people are, because they really are guarded now for many reasons, but anytime you can see that stuff, I find it to be really cool. I thought the Blues did a great job with that.
Yeah, they did a great job. And, Danny, it's the best whenever you can go behind the scenes. That's, as a writer, 20 years in the business, I love when you can take fans behind the scenes. And don't get me wrong, writing is my passion, but to find the words that describe what's happening or describe the scene, you got to have the eyes, the observation skills to be able to tell the reader when you're writing a story what it looked like in the room. As you know well, being in TV all your life, showing that video is even more amazing.
Did it piss you off, though, that you didn't have a chance to be as close as some of those guys that had the access? Again, they work for the Blues. You can understand it's their product, their message they want to put out there. But did it piss you off at all that you weren't in there, too?
Well, you'd wish you can do it. It doesn't piss me off because I know that would never happen, whether it be the Blues or any other team. I think for them to let an independent outlet come in and hear their secrets, they're likely not going to do that. For Mike Caruso, Trevor Nickerson, who did a great job with Blue Note Productions, to go in there, they've got to have Army's trust, and they had that. Nobody else is going to get that.
Yeah, it was good. I found it interesting, the back and forth with the scouts and, Hall of Famer with Al McGinnis, who was in there. I mean, just everybody had a voice, and everybody's got an opinion, but ultimately it falls on Doug Armstrong's shoulders to make the pick. But I love seeing the back and forth and what they have to say about particular players. That's great. That's the insight I want to see.
It is, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's the Anatomy of the Draft. The Blues put it out, and what Danny's referring to there is they'll be talking about player X, and they'll say, "What do you think, John?" And he'll say, "Well, I think he's got good puck skills. He drips passion. He doesn't want to come off the ice, so on and so forth." And then they'll turn to the other scout. "What do you think, Pete?" And he goes, "Well, I think the guy's lazy, and he doesn't get back, and he doesn't help out his teammates." And then so they'll have that back and forth. But the banter's the best.
Yes.
If anybody didn't catch it, listen, guys like Al McInnes and Keith Tkachuk have been around each other so long, so they can set each other up. So in the Anatomy of the Draft, you hear Al McInnes say, "All right, let's hear it, Walt." And Big Walt says, the 2 rules, get the puck to Big Walt, and number 2, don't forget rule number 1.
It sounds like Big Walt, man. That's the way he rolls. JR, how many years now at The Athletic for you?
I think this is 7 or 8, somewhere in there.
Yeah? Are you enjoying it still?
Yeah, love it.
You're covering the beat with the Blues and doing that. Have you ever had aspirations to do another sport or even leave the city, go cover another team?
No, and you know what? It's so odd because I didn't grow up playing hockey. I was the fat kid maybe in the schoolyard in the rollerblades that I bought at Walmart, playing a little roller hockey in the 90s. But, I never envisioned playing hockey. Let me share this quick one to show you where I came from is, the Post-Dispatch puts me on the Blues. I didn't expect that. And one day I find myself in the locker room, and it was a game against the Chicago Blackhawks. I'll never forget this. It's 4-4, 5-4, 5-5, 6-5, 6-6. And I didn't grow up playing hockey, so I didn't know the term at the time. We're going back to 2005. The term pond hockey. It's like a pond hockey game.
Wide open, all that stuff, yeah.
So for people who don't know, when you write at the Post-Dispatch and you cover a 7 o'clock game, the deadline's like at 10 or 10:30. So you only have time to run down to the locker room, get a quick quote, run it back up to your computer, type it up, and then your story's done. Well, one day I ran into the locker room after that Blackhawks game, and Dallas Drake, the former captain, you guys remember?
Love Dallas Drake.
Yeah,
good guy.
He said, "Well, it's like a pond hockey game."
Terrible teeth, but great guy. That's
Dallas,
a sidebar.
He did. A lot of them do. But Dallas says it's like a pond hockey game. And in my mind, he said pawn, like a chess match, back and forth, P-A-W-N. So that's what I go and write in my story, and I'll never forget it. I walk in the locker room the next day, walk right up to Dallas Drake, and he must have read the story in the Post-Dispatch. He goes, "You're an idiot." You're an idiot.
One of the things, though, at The Athletic that you do is that you're trying to go behind the scenes a little bit more. It's not just about the X's and O's of that night. You're trying to find out about who these guys are as people. I think that's a fair assessment. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And that's the part of the job I love, and that's honestly why I took the job is I wanted to be able to focus on telling human interest stories. And we do get into the X's and O's, and we get into video, and we get into a lot of things, but it's the human interest stories. And, I can go back in these 7 years at The Athletic, and the 2 that stick out the most, Alex Pietrangelo. He tells me that he and his wife, had a couple miscarriages. And so we sat down for an hour and talked about that. And then I'll never forget this either, when Mike Caruso came up to me one day and said, "You should do a story on Bobby Plager. He never watches the games." And I, "What do you mean he doesn't watch the games?" He goes, "Follow him for one game." So I followed him him for one game. And guess what? It was a playoff game against Dallas in 2019. I'll never forget the mail, the messages I got the next day. You didn't even write about the game. Tell us about the game. This is the playoffs. And I said, I'm following Bobby Plager around. And still today, I'll get people to come up and say, one of the best stories I ever read, The Athletic, that you did is on following Bobby Plager around the rink, and he does not watch the game. So,
you had a great relationship with Bobby, didn't you?
yeah, he's the best, the best.
One of the things too that you sent me pictures. We were doing a TV show and you wrote the book, the 100 Things Before You Die That You Should Know or Learn About the Blues. I'm
Let's
paraphrasing.
see if we can get this right, Frazier.
Easy. So one of the things though that you sent me was pictures of Bobby in Boston. And not watching the game. I mean, that's stuff that is chronicled there in that story that you won't find anywhere else. And also tell the story about the big boy, the St. Louis hometown hero, with his mom seeing her after Game 7, I believe it was, and what she had to give you in terms of a memento, what she was wearing, I guess it was that night.
Yeah, lots of pictures of Bobby Plager over the years. And what you'll see is the game's going on, and he is on a couch making coffee. I'll never forget that he walks the concourse, and if Bobby Plager's standing in a certain spot when the other team scores, he used to take his foot and mark the spot in the carpet and say, don't walk there. I'm not coming back here.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he said he felt that it was superstitious to walk wherever he was when the team scored a goal. And then with Patty Maroon's mom, the night that he scored the double OT winner, I was able to, because of The Athletic, we didn't have necessarily a deadline, Danny. I waited out the family, and I stayed down into that family area until Pat came out to hug his mom, to hug his family, and she told the story about the night that he scored. She had a prayer card, and I don't know, can we say this? In her bra.
Okay, yeah, you can say that.
Just said it.
Okay.
And she pulls it out, and she holds it up, and she says, here's what did it, here's what did it, and she's holding a prayer card just about 30 minutes after Pat had scored that big goal for the Blues.
That's awesome. Who's the guy that you really enjoy covering right now with the current Blues team?
Current Blues team, there's some good ones. I think one that sticks out really is Braden Shen, Ryan O'Reilly before he left. There's some other good ones. Justin Falk, stand-up guy. A lot of the stand-up guys on this team. But, Shen sticks out. He gets it. He gets, our job, and he comes out and explains things to us and, puts some thought into the question. Speaking of which, I'm sure we'll touch on this when we get into some Blues questions. But Braden Shen, I've always felt like he could be the next captain of the Blues.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, and maybe we can get more in depth later on, Danny, but I think that...
I'm running the show. I'll ask the questions.
Just like I've known you since you were 16 years old. I think that could the Blues name a captain? Doug Armstrong hinted in the offseason that he's going to do his homework and might not name a captain, and that could be the case. We'll see as we get closer to training camp. But, I've always thought that it could be Braden Shen, but it turns out that the Blues may not even put a C on anybody heading into this
May
season.
give you like a Tony La Russa here, tied for first, but favorite player to cover. And I know you've had a bunch, but is there one that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think, and if they're listening, some Blues players, I know there's a lot in town. I enjoyed covering all of them. But I think one that really sits there at the top for me is like a Barrett Jackman. He just, when he came into the league, he was a pro, and he handled himself so professionally. And I think we just talked about the guy, Bobby Plager, number 5. He passed that down to Barrett Jackman, and I think Barrett took it and ran with it. Look, he's, second all-time games played, most for defensemen. He's going to be in the Blues Hall of Fame one day. I did a podcast with him there for a couple of years. So there are plenty of them, but I think in terms of guys who sit there at the top in terms of treating you right, knowing that you had a job, and kind of
Class
getting some
act.
jabs every once in a while. Yeah, it's Barrett Jackman.
10:14 here in St. Louis. Time check brought to you by Clarkson Jewelers. Some quick hitters on the Blues coming up. A lot of text questions for JR as well. This is 101 ESPN. Dan McLaughlin filling in for Tim McKernan. He'll be back with you on Monday. I'll be back in this seat tomorrow at 10. Tim Peel, longtime NHL ref. Yep, calls St. Louis home, and he'll be in studio with us. That is Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. I'm looking forward to visiting with Tim. There's a lot of different directions that you can get into. And one of the things I want to ask about is youth sports. Like when he's at his kids' games and watching a ref, watching an umpire and seeing the parents' reaction to said umpire, said kid, it's out of control right now. And I just want to, from his viewpoint as a guy who's at the top of his game, one of the elite guys in the world at what he does, when he's watching that, like, what do you think? You know what I mean?
Yeah, Peelsy's the best.
Drives me crazy.
Yeah, he's the best. And he does have that perspective. He'll bring it to you tomorrow, Danny, of being a professional referee and knowing what it's like from that side of it. But then also he's the father of a couple young kids who are competitive, and he's at their sports. And
exactly.
Super positive guy. I got him on Facebook, and it doesn't matter what you write. He's always there to say, have a great day. Congratulations. Best of luck.
Yeah.
I look forward to listening to tomorrow.
So, again, our text line is 399-9646. I'm going to give you some quick hitters on the Blues, and let's just start with this. What's been the biggest headline in the offseason for the Blues?
I think the biggest headline, Danny, was trying to trade Torrey Krug. I think that that trade with Philadelphia, it looked like it could go through. The Blues obviously were hopeful. The last thing that a GM does is take the trade to the player who has the no-trade clause. They took it to Torrey Krug, and he thought about it for a couple days and then declined. He invoked that no-trade clause. So if that goes through, you're looking at a much bigger trade with Philadelphia. And even though Kevin Hayes might be the headline because that's what actually happened at the end of the day, it's the fact that they attempted to trade Torrey Krug. It didn't go through. It shows their cards in terms they want to trade him. And so I think eventually, with 4 years left on that deal, they'll try to find something, I would think, between now and then where they move Torrey Krug eventually.
Do we know why exactly he invoked his right to say, I'm blocking this trade?
Yeah, I think it's probably multifaceted. The biggest thing is that Philadelphia is in a huge rebuild. It's going to take them a while to turn the corner. And I think,
it wasn't necessarily about uprooting family and that kind of thing, or did they have a little bit of it?
Yeah, definitely part of it. Here's the thing is Philadelphia is likely going to flip him eventually, whether it be right after the trade or whether it be at the upcoming trade deadline next season, Dan. And I think that if you're Torrey Krug, his wife, their family, you're thinking about, okay, we're moving from St. Louis to Philadelphia now, and then potentially in February or March we could be on the move again.
So the entire defense is the same as last year. Is it going to be better or same? What do you see as improvements for the defense going forward next year?
Well, at this point, as we sit here in August, I don't know that you can say that it can be better. It's the same defense that the Blues sent out there last year. Now, you change the coach. Mike Van Ryan's gone, by the way. If you missed it, he's in Toronto now, assistant with the Maple Leafs. And Mike Weber takes over. He's a first-year NHL coach. But Doug Armstrong, Grant, you were there, talked about, the need to relate to some of these younger players. And in doing my research on Mike Weber, the new assistant coach, he really works well with these young kids. He's coming off a stint in the American Hockey League coaching these young guys, Dan, and I think that he's going to come in and kind of have their ear. So we'll see what happens. But the thing is, I agree with Doug Armstrong from one side of it that all four of these guys can't have another bad year all at the same time. But are they good enough? Is the talent there with these four guys to be a top four defense in the National Hockey League?
What are the Blues getting with Kevin Hayes? What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're getting a veteran who is going to be a decent third-line center for them, and I think they're getting a guy at a great cost. I mean, you're talking about a $7 million guy that the Blues are going to get at 50%. Now, people could say that, yeah, that contract was bloated. He should have never got $7 million, but he's still better than a $3.5 million player, which is what the Blues are going to get him for the next few years. So, Dan, let's say you're asking this question in January. Are we looking back and saying, wow, what a steal. He's great. He's got 18 goals. No, that's not going to be the type of guy I think that you see with a Kevin Hayes, but he's steady. He's going to bring some stability to the lineup, and most importantly, he's going to keep this team more competitive than if Doug Armstrong just stripped it down and went straight to the prospects. This is a guy that's going to give the Blues a chance to kind of be in that playoff conversation.
So what do the top three lines look like with the addition now of Hayes? What's it going to look like? And there's been a lot of movement here from the trade deadline to what we're talking about here in August, and still maybe some more shuffling, but what's it going to look like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that this could go. I think that when we get to camp, we could probably see, though, Pavel Buchnevich on a line with Thomas and Kyrou at the top. I think that second line is probably going to have Braden Shen centering it. I think you could have Kasperi Kapanen on the right side there. Here's the pivot. What happens second line left wing? Is it a Sammy Blais? He's got the skill. We saw it last year. He had a great finish after the Blues acquired him from New York. He had a great world championship. Or is Jake Neighbors ready to step up, and can he be a second-line guy? Who plays that left wing side on that second line, I think, is going to be the biggest thing. And then on the third line, you're going to have plenty of options. Kevin Hayes is going to be the center of that line. Do you have a Jake Neighbors on that line, who plays on the right side? And then you're looking at a fourth line of potentially a Toropchenko, a Sundqvist. You got McKernan, you got Blais. If he doesn't play on the second line, he can slip down. So a lot of options there. The one thing is, I don't think you look at these 12 and you say, wow, that's a top 5 playoff contender. But I do think that there's some depth with this group.
Sundqvist back again.
Yeah, how about that?
What'd you think?
Well, it was back and forth. You do your homework and make some phone calls behind the scenes, and I know he had a lot of interest in coming back and being with the Blues. This is where he wanted to be, but did the Blues have interest? And I thought it made sense from the perspective of he's going to be cheap, and he's not going to look for term on the contract, so they do get him at the 1 year, $775,000. Doug Armstrong, Craig Berube, the one thing I always say about them, Dan, is they like players who they know what they're going to get from the guy. You look at McKernan's back. How many times did they bring Perron back? Sundqvist is coming back. Sammy Blais is coming back. And so I think for 1 year, put him in the middle on that fourth line. And like Sundqvist told me in the article that I wrote last week, a couple weeks ago, he said that I want to teach the young kids how to play the Blues way. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Is it odd to have guys come back this often, or at least to have 3 in one fold that do it, the second stint with the Blues or with any team in the NHL? Or is that something that you see that's more commonplace?
I think that it happens more here, and I say that not exactly knowing. I mean, I don't sit, look at the Philadelphia roster and say, wow, there's 3 guys back. But I think you look at this, it's got to be more than average when you look at the number of guys that we just mentioned, and I know there's plenty of others. But that's the one thing I've said about Army over the years. Like, if you show him that you're a good soldier, if he's got a chance to bring you back, he's going to do it.
So the fourth line looks like it could be more physical potentially than in past years. Was that by design?
I think so. I think that they got away from it for a couple of years. And I think that it was obvious, we're going to use this word like we always do, identity. It was obvious they didn't have an identity. When you talk about the Dakota Joshuas, you had a Nathan Walker, you had all these different guys, and it just didn't come together. Logan Brown. So I think that you look at it this year, and you've got a Toropchenko, who everybody in the organization likes. I think the fans like too. You got a Sundqvist in the middle. You got a McKernan, you got a Sammy Blais potential, and then you still have a Nathan Walker as a depth guy, who I like him as a depth guy. So, I think they can be physical. It's just going to be dependent on who's actually on that line. Is Blais on the second line? Is he on the fourth line? But if you're talking about Toropchenko and Sammy Blais laying hits and Sundqvist in the middle of those guys,
it's physical.
That's definitely going to be a tougher line than we've seen the past couple years.
Goaltending hasn't been talked about a lot. You got Bennington coming back, Joel Hofer as well. So it looks like that's the tandem moving forward, at least for the immediate this season.
Yep. Jordan Bennington back. His save percentage definitely doesn't look good from last year, sub 900. I stuck up for him a lot during this past season because I felt that the defense wasn't up to snuff. That includes the forwards. I felt like Bennington left out to dry a lot. Having said all that, there were stretches that he didn't play well. And you cannot deny, looking at his precipitous drop-off in save percentage the past 4 years, it's gone 912, 910, 904, 894. Show any goaltending coach in the league that drop off, and you're going to say, yeah, this is a guy who doesn't have it. So I get it. Like the fans that are driving around saying Jordan Bennington is not the guy, you can have that conversation. But I think, Dan, that when he's on and when the defense in front of him is playing well, he can still be a very capable goalie in this league. Now, this year it's going to be a little bit different. Instead of Thomas Greiss backing him up, you got the 23-year-old Joel Hofer. He gets the deal to come up $775,000 to be the backup. He looked really good, but he's only played 8 NHL games. So how are they going to play off each other? Is Joel Hofer going to push Jordan Bennington for some starts? We'll see what happens, but that's going to be the tandem. Probably not just this year, but for the coming future, the next couple of years.
So the 314 asked you, JR, what about Nathan Walker? What's going to happen with him?
Well, I think that he'll be that 12th, 13th forward. I think that's going to be the situation. And look, there's another player that you know what you get. And it's not going to wow you, but he's going to be there every night. He's going to score a few goals. If they are going to put this kind of bigger, more physical fourth line out there, he doesn't fit that, prototype. But I think that he's shown even with his size, that he can play that physical brand of hockey if you need him to.
A lot of rapid fire here with Jeremy Rutherford of the Athletic. It is 10:28 in St. Louis. Our time check is brought to you by Clarkson Jewelers. I'm Dan McLaughlin filling in for Tim McKernan. He'll be back with you on Monday. JR, Dan, and this is 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Last night, the Cardinals take down the Rays 6-4 in Tampa. Dakota Hudson picks up the win. He went 5 innings with 7 hits and 3 earned runs against. Tonight, the Cardinals are back at it in Tampa Bay for Game 3 of 3 in that series. Cardinals looking to take the win in the series against the Rays. It'll be Matthew Liberatore starting for the Cardinals tonight. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff. Find new roads and shop 24/7 at londoff.com and londoffautoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
.101 ESPN. It is the balloon party. I'm Dan McLaughlin filling in for Tim McKernan. That's Jeremy Rutherford.
They're saying on the text line that Timmy usually has his shirt off by now, so I don't know if we need to.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How about everybody else involved with the show? Grant, any thoughts?
Hey, you know what? Wherever the show goes, you know?
Let's not let it go there.
Depends on what they pay you.
Hey, if you want to get the YouTube viewership up, that's one way to do it.
Well, you're saying you got a great body is what you're saying. You're lifting all the time. You're in great shape.
I'm talking about us as a show, not me personally.
$1 I'll throw at you.
Oh, look at that.
That's on the YouTube. What's wrong with you guys?
That's the first time I've ever seen Danny's wallet open up.
Yeah, it's funny. It's got cobwebs.
Look at that.
Well, I don't like to use credit cards, so I carry a lot of cash every once in a while.
Panger could sit on that thing and boost them up in the broadcast.
Why are you taking shots at former broadcasters here in St. Louis? It's uncalled for.
Oh,
why are you doing that? What's wrong with you? Look at you. You don't want to go down that road. I want to ask you just a simple question. Did Doug Armstrong do enough? Did he do enough for this club?
Well, so it's a complicated answer. I'm going to give it to you as straight and easy as I can. Doug Armstrong had a situation where he needed to decide, what are we doing with this team? Are we trying to win this year, and are we making decisions where we're going to give up assets and future to try to win this year? Look, Erik Karlsson got traded a couple days ago to Pittsburgh. Let's say Blues fans wanted him. Can Doug Armstrong say, hey, we'll give you the 10th overall pick, we'll give you this, we'll give you that to get an Erik Karlsson? And the Blues going to be better this year? Yeah, they're going to be better. But guess what? Big picture, they're going to be better for keeping their 3 first-round picks. I watched Dalibor Dvorsky out of the prospect camp. Unbelievable. Like, I try not to get caught up in that stuff. I try not to oversell a guy. He was great. He's going to be, I think, really good. So I think that the Blues are in a situation where, you know, their hands are kind of tied with the defenseman. You tried to move one. It shows with Torrey Krug invoking that no-trade clause how hard it can be. You finally find a package that works, and the guy's not going to approve the trade. So, to me, did he do enough? The question has to be phrased, did he do enough in terms of what he was trying to do with the situation? And I think he did. I think he got about as much out of the situation as you can.
So can they be a playoff team?
And see, this leads right into it. So, yeah, great follow-up is...
Thanks.
I don't go into the season saying the Blues can't make the playoffs. I don't do that because I think last year they had what we thought was a decent team. And I think when you bring in a Vrana and a Kapanen and a Hayes, and these guys are going to be motivated by their contract situations, you're going to have some young players coming in. You're going to have a top 4 defense that wants to prove that, you know, they weren't as bad as they were last year. You know, I think there's going to be some motivation with this team. But where I put the limit on this, Dan, is, you know, I'm not going into the season saying they're going to finish first, second, third in the Central Division. They're going to be, you know, top 5 in the West. I look at it as a situation as, hey, this could be a wild card team. And if they get in the playoffs, could they go a couple rounds? Maybe, yeah. But that's kind of where I put the ceiling. But I don't go into the season saying, hey, this is a retool. They're not going to be in the playoffs for 2 more years.
I found it interesting. I read The Athletic every day. I love the stories of all sports. And I did find this one interesting, and I actually went back and read it. But there was a story in which Craig Berube was the number 2 coach on the hot seat. Now, there is a rotation of coaches, it seems like, all the time in the National Hockey League. The shelf life of these guys isn't very long. But it's maybe a little different story in St. Louis because he's won the Stanley Cup. And then, you know what, your grace period for that said coach is, that leash is a little bit longer. So it says he's number 2 on the hot seat. Would you agree with that? Where are you with that assessment?
Yeah, so just to give some context, that poll was done at The Athletic, and the way they do it is they send out an email to all the beat writers who cover teams. So there's a lot of us, 20-plus beat writers at The Athletic, and that's compiling everybody's voting. And so I voted. I didn't put Craig Berube on my list. I think the situation in St. Louis is this with him. Look, they just let him hire his own assistant coaches. And, Dan, you know as well as anybody, in that situation, you don't give the rein to a guy and let him name his assistant coaches when you're thinking about getting rid of him.
100%.
And also look at last season when it fell off the map.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, Doug Armstrong kept by his side. So, you know, do they...
Called out the players.
Exactly, a couple times, you know, early in the season and later in the season. So, you know, has Doug Armstrong sat in his office and wondered out loud, you know, is Craig Berube still the guy? I'm sure he has. But I think he's come to the conclusion that, yes, it's on the players, and we're going to try to see this thing through. Also, you have to throw this in there. You know, he's in, second year of a 3-year contract. The Blues don't pay people to leave. They've never bought out a player. Doug Armstrong has never bought out a player, you know, since 2010. Sure, they've moved on from some coaches, but they didn't owe him a ton of money. Not a situation where you owe him $4 million for the next couple of years, which is what they do with Craig Berube.
So on the theme of the assistants there, you got Mike Weber. He replaces Mike Van Ryn. Then you have...
Mike Babcock.
Yeah, Mike Babcock will replace, or he's back in, or he's in right now. And so he is going to work and be the skills coach, correct? So then you have Weber working with the defense and the PK. So, you know, you bring in a couple of assistants like this, what kind of difference can it make? Or is it just one of those things that, hey, different voice, different sounding board. This is why we did this.
Well, I think something had to happen with the defense and the penalty kill, and that's what Mike Van Ryn was in charge of. And that's not to take anything away from Mike Van Ryn. You know, he won a Stanley Cup, and the penalty kill had been good for a couple years, but it wasn't last year. So I think they do need a new voice. So Mike Weber comes in. He's going to handle the defense and the penalty kill, as we touched on. And then as far as Michael Babcock, he's the son of the Mike Babcock, who will coach the Columbus Blue Jackets now. So as soon as you hear that name, everybody's like, uh-oh. Well, you know, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's let Michael Babcock come in and see what he can do. But in terms of the title of the position, skills coach, the Blues haven't had that. You know, have they had guys come in and kind of help with the skills? Yeah, over the years they have. But he's going to be a guy who comes in and kind of specializes with some of these players on the skill development. And also, he won't be on the bench, I'm told, unless Craig Berube decides to put him there. Doug Armstrong saying that Michael Babcock's going to be an eye in the sky during the games up in the press box looking with that view.
Prospect camp, you had a lot of new faces, a lot of young guys. It's the idea of a prospect camp. So I'll get into Dvorsky in just a moment. We talked about it yesterday on the Fast Lane. Anybody else kind of grab your attention? You're like, oh, who is that guy? Who's that number, whatever? Is there somebody else outside of Dvorsky? And I'm going to ask you about him, but anybody else that really caught your attention?
Yeah, Otto Stenberg is another one of their first-round picks, I think, that stuck out. Pekarsik, help me with his first name, Grant, there.
Uri.
Pekarsik.
I'm pretty sure,
Pekarsik. Yeah, he was a later pick, a good player. So I think they did really well, it looks to be, Dan, with this draft. But there are some other players from recent drafts that I think they're going to stick out. One name to watch, I'll throw this at you, defenseman Marc-Andre Gaudette. I think he was a fifth-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm hearing good things about him, a number 4, number 5 in the NHL. I even had Corey Pronman, our scouting guru at The Athletic, reach out to me the other day, and he said, are the Blues saying anything about this Gaudette? Because I like him, and for, again, I believe a fifth-round draft pick to get some notoriety like that, I think, is something that you don't see too often.
So you said Dvorsky was really good. I asked this question to you yesterday for fans that didn't hear it, Blues fans or sports fans here in St. Louis. How long would it take him to be in St. Louis? So, number one, that's the question. And then typically on a number 10 pick, and I understand that it's all different for clubs' needs and growth of a player, but typically how long does it take then for a player when you're drafted 10th or let's say top 15 overall to get to the National Hockey League?
Yeah, so let me give his contract situation before I answer that, is that he's a Slovakian playing in Sweden. He made the decision to go play in Sweden, and he's got a 2-year contract. He's switching teams this year. He's going to play on a 2-year contract, but that league doesn't have any stipulation of him going to the NHL if and when he wants. So he can come at any time. I expect that he'll play this full season in Sweden, and then I think it's a mutual option next year, so he could leave next season and come to St. Louis. So it's going to depend on, you know, how does this season go for him? How does this year go for the Blues? Do they feel like it's a good situation to bring him in next year? But best case scenario, I think you could see Dvorsky in a Blues uniform, not this upcoming season, but the following season. You know, we'll see. So, you know, where does he fit in? I'm going to have an article coming out at The Athletic. It should be any minute within the hour, projecting the Blues 2025-26 lineup. Sometimes we have fun, you know, fans want to look to the future, what it could look like, and we've got Dvorsky's name in there. So I think he's a guy we could see sooner than later.
What does he do so well, and what does he need to improve upon to get here?
Yeah, the one thing that really stuck out to me, first of all, the skills there. You know, he can score. He had a spinorama backhanded, you know, rooftop shot that was a goal and just lit up the Centene Center. Grant, you're probably out there. But I think for me, it's something that Keith Tkachuk noticed and commented on as well, is kind of the puck protection, and in terms of being able to make pretty slippery moves while handling the puck, I think was really noticeable. He was heavy on the back check. Anytime the puck was heading back the other way, he was one of the first guys back, tracking him down. So there's just so many mannerisms and so many things that you don't typically see from an 18-year-old Blues player. But what we have to keep in mind is that how many times have we seen an 18-year-old forward? You saw a Jaden Schwartz and a Vladimir Tarasenko. They were drafted, early in that 2010 draft. But you had the lockout, and then it was a while before you saw Tarasenko. Sure. So this is the first time we've seen a top 10 pick at 18 years old come over, and the difference between a guy being top 10 and being 25 in the draft, it's huge. You can see it.
You know, I'm hearing you say all these different things about the Blues, and young guys coming, 3 guys coming back for their second stint, maybe to be, you know, kind of a gap bridge the gap, so to speak, to get to other players that are developing or to get a little relief with the cap, whatever the case may be. It sounds like a retool to an extent. So how long is it until you say, oh, this is back to where they were 2019 Cup contenders? They were rolling in 20 when COVID hit, that kind of thing. I'm not saying they're the same team. I'm not saying that they're going to be that good, but at least you're saying, okay, annual visits to the playoffs with a chance to make a run, and who knows what happens from there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be several years. And, maybe they look
several.
Yeah, and I'll put a number on it. I think they probably look at it different. Maybe they think it could be 2 or 3 years. But if you look at it like this, so you're putting in the work to make the trades for the first round picks. Then you're going to the draft this June and making those picks. You're drafting a Dvorsky, and then he's going to play 2 more years in Sweden. And you're gathering all these young players who can be part of it, and then at one point you're going to put them in the lineup. Well, when's that going to be? You're hopeful that it's 2 to 3 years from now. So you're not going to dress like an all-rookie team in 2025, 26, right? But at some point, those players have to arrive and have to get some action so you see what you have. And can you bring in a Dvorsky and a Snuggerud and bring in all this young talent that you've accumulated in 2 to 3 years and all of a sudden think that you're going to be a cup contender? No. Go back to 2017, 18. What did it take to finally get to that point where you could win a Stanley Cup? Well, it took trades like getting Braden Shen, getting Jay Bomeister, getting those guys, and it took several years for all that to come together. So my thing is this. I think they're on the right track, and I think they can be competitive in a few years. I don't think this is a 5 or 6 year type thing, but I do think it's a situation where you're going to have to let those young players come in at some point. And I don't know how you look at that roster of younger guys and say, okay, we're there. This is a cup team.
Interesting.
To put a number on it, in terms
2 to
of
3 years.
Yeah,
what you
when
said.
the Blues could be that type of team, it could be 3 to 4 years.
10:45 here in St. Louis. Time check brought to you by Clarkson Jewelers. That's Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. I'm Dan McLaughlin filling in for Tim McKernan. Again, I'll be back here tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Love filling in, and it's a lot of fun to be on with you. Back with more in a moment. Reminder that 101 ESPN has your chance to win a 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash for the Cardinals and the A's. Next week's Bud Bash game features a limited edition Gary Gaetti bobblehead. And if you were listening to the Fast Lane yesterday, it's maybe a tough question. If you can answer this question right, Mike Ryder has the answer. JR and I covered a particular team here in St. Louis that, let's just face it, JR, no one else was at the game and covering it except us. What was the name of that team? What was the name of the team? Don't say it.
No, I know.
If you say it, you're going to the Bud Bash. 314-399-9646. 314-399-9646. Get all the details on this season's series of Budweiser Bash Cardinal tickets and games now at cardinals.com/promotions. Okay. That's going to be tough. I don't know if anybody's going to get it.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And Danny, maybe people have heard the story, but again, I think you and I were the only two media members there, and we were willingly there to cover the team. Happy to do it. 20 years old, and I'll never forget when the executive of the team berated us in the elevator the one night and said, "Why can't you guys get more coverage of us at your outlets?" And I said, we don't want to give his name away because that'll give the sport away. But I said, well, there's something going on right now called the Olympics, and my newspaper's pretty tied up in covering the Olympics.
My favorite story about JR is I was doing the Blues pregame and intermissions and postgames on television, and you had some pictures that were taken of you as you appeared on the pregame show with me to talk about the Blues, and your family was very, very proud that you were on TV.
Well, I'll give the short version because we've told it before, but yeah, they told me that whenever you're going to be on TV, please tell us, we'll watch. And you came up to me in Nashville, I remember, and you said, hey, can you do pregame? And I said, yeah, I'll jump on with you. So I called my father-in-law, and I said, hey, I'm going to be on like 6:15-ish, and he goes, oh, man, right smack in the middle of Wheel of Fortune. And so we did the spot pregame, Dan, and a couple weeks later I was over at the in-laws and I saw a stack of pictures on their table. Turns out they could not find a VCR tape to tape the segment, so they took still pictures of us on the TV, and there's 45 pictures stacked on top of each other on the kitchen table. So I took them and flipped through them like cards, like a deck of cards, and you and I are just gyrating, moving back and forth because it's different pictures. So I called you, I think I texted you, whatever, got your address and mailed you the picture.
That's so awesome. So they did not record it, but they took
no
the picture.
VCR tape. They probably
Do you still have them?
Nah, somewhere maybe.
I bet I still have the ones that you sent.
Yeah. They didn't want to tape over General Hospital, so they couldn't.
I have a question that I cannot understand why he isn't in the National Hockey League Hall of Fame. And you've mentioned his name multiple times already this morning. That's Keith Tkachuk. I don't understand it. He should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so at The Athletic, they asked us recently when they were making Hall of Fame announcements, let's do a mock one. And is there anybody you would promote for the Hall of Fame? And I made the case for Keith Tkachuk. I believe he deserves to be in. When I think of Hall of Fame, Dan, you correct me, your thoughts. If you were the preeminent player at your position for a decade, then you're in there. And that's what he was as a power forward. But beyond that, I did the research. I did the homework. I went back and looked. He's like 35th in the NHL in terms of scoring, points, all that. And every guy ahead of him is in. And I get that there's got to be a cutoff some point. You can't get to 86 and say, okay, well, 87 deserves to be in too. But Keith Tkachuk has the numbers. And also, one of the best American-born players
That's
ever.
Another key factor for me.
Yeah, and so why isn't he? Yes, the question, why is he? I don't know. These Hall of Fame things, they take on a life of their own. There's guys that should be in that aren't. Did Keith Tkachuk live up to his entire potential? Is that a question that they ask? Whether he did or not, he still dominated the league, and so to me, he's a Hall of Famer.
I was so happy to see Pierre Turgeon get in or go in. He is one of the best, most underrated players I've ever seen. He was awesome.
He was great. Just a physical specimen, just ripped. I saw him at the alumni game for the Winter Classic, back in 2017. He can still play.
Exactly.
Ask Rivers, he's Pierre Turgeon out there just still looking like he was back in the 2000s for the Blues.
How about the Blues Hall of Fame? You mentioned it a little bit earlier. Give me some names. And when the Cardinals did this, and now with the Blues are going to find this too, is that you have your Hall of Famers, and that's the first couple of waves that go in. And they're obvious choices. It's Bernie, it's Chris Pronger, it's Al, those guys, Brett, that are going to wear that blue jacket. But there's some others, though, and I think you mentioned Barrett Jackman.
Right.
That would be one. But there's some other guys that you think about that had just a hell of a career here in St. Louis that maybe not be National Hockey League Hall of Fame, but certainly when you think about St. Louis hockey and St. Louis Blues hockey. They have a huge role in what's happened here.
I think this is great. And I've been watching the Cardinals Hall of Fame, and you host that for years. Cardinals did a phenomenal job. I was glad to see the Blues do it. They had it in the works for a while. Maybe COVID set it back a little bit, but now they got it going. And so last year they had the first dinner. As you mentioned, it was all the guys with their numbers in the rafters, the Prongers, McKinnis's, those guys. And then now we're going to get a steady stream of just great St. Louis Blues to go into the Hall of Fame. They just had, I think the voting just shut down, right? And so they're putting in the second class, and we are able to talk about our ballots. And my ballot included Keith Tkachuk. It included Pavel Demitra. Also, I put Emile Francis, the general manager from the 80s,
Brought
70s,
Bernie
80s.
here.
Yeah. Bernie and Brian Sutter.
Exactly.
That team. And then also, I put on my list, I don't think he's going to get much
Sudsy
traction.
on your list?
He's already in, so he's in.
I mean, on your original list, did you have all the guys that they, thought they were? Did you make a list personally, and was he on that list? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So to answer it, they told us not to vote for the guys who are already in the rafters that were automatically.
Okay, so that's how they did the first year.
That's how they did the first year. So now this year we all submitted 4. I had Tkachuk, Demitra, Emile Francis. I also gave some love to Lynn Patrick, the original executive for the St. Louis Blues. He brought in Scotty Bowman. Not a name that's going to generate a lot, but a guy who was there from day one.
Yeah, who's some others that are kind of laying in the weeds? And that's one that I had not thought of, but some others that you think about like that.
Yeah, I think they hit a lot of those guys. Scotty Bowman, Emile Francis, I think will get in at some point. You think about, the Solomons are in because they put the ownership groups in. In terms of guys laying in the weeds, maybe guys that don't have the numbers, but they definitely set the tone for this organization. Guys like Al Arbor, so on and so forth. So many early on guys that I think we tend to forget about, but they created this tradition. And then eventually you'll start to see, I think, the Barrett Jackmans and a lot of these 2019 Stanley Cup guys eventually are going to get in.
I was thinking that too. Petro's a lock.
Yeah.
When he's done. I still wanted to see a statue of him wearing a St. Louis Blues sweater, staying in St. Louis, and the statue would be him holding the cup with the fireworks going off in the back.
Yeah, I'll never forget this, Dan. This is, we do a lot of radio, right? And the one day I was filling in, I can't remember what show, and we had Alex Petrangelo's dad on, Joe, and we have him live on the air, and I get an email from Sports Illustrated that says, here's the new cover, this is an early copy of the release, and I pull it up, and it's Alex, his son, lifting the cup up, and we said live on the air to Joe Petrangelo, we just got an email with a picture of Sports Illustrated cover, and it's your son holding the cup, and he just paused, and you could just tell the emotion that was on the other side of the line.
That's so cool. It's amazing how many of these guys stay in St. Louis. And I'm just thinking about the Bernies of the world, Chris Pronger living here, Al living here. It is amazing how the alumni that stay in St. Louis that are affiliated with the St. Louis Blues.
It's great, Dan, because a lot of times I want to do stories and interview these guys, and they'll say, yeah, just meet me at Starbucks on Lindbergh. So I got to drive 20 minutes to meet some of these Hall of Famers to write these stories. A lot of them have 314 numbers. It's crazy. And then there again, that goes back to we were asking earlier, is it common that the Blues bring back so many guys? This is another question that's hard to answer because you don't know what it's like with other franchises, but you can listen to a Keith Tkachuk or a Barrett Jackman tell you why they stayed here, and if you listen to them, they'll say this doesn't happen in other cities like
really
it
doesn't
happens in St. Louis.
And the other part of it too is that it's had a major effect on the National Hockey League because of the kids coming out of St. Louis that are coached by former NHL players. Their kids are getting coached, and other kids of their buddies are getting coached by, Jeff Brown, for instance, or some of these guys that got into youth hockey, and it's made a huge impact in that regard, too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you think about Al McKinnis coaching your team, Keith Tkachuk, whether it be Jeff Brown, Kelly Chase has been involved, all those guys. I'm around some of these younger players, and now they're getting older because we're all getting older, but, in their 20s and 30s who had these guys as their coaches, and they went on to play college hockey, AAA, so on and so forth. It really has made an impact, and no bigger impact than that draft years ago where you had 5 of them taken in the first round.
As we wrap it up, the team that we covered, what was it? We got people, we got enough, so that guessed properly, but what was the team?
Am I giving the answer here?
Yeah.
The Arena Football League.
Yes.
And it was the St. Louis Stallions, right? Was it the Stallions?
Stampede?
Stampede. Yeah. You said Stallions earlier.
I did. It's a Stampede. Well, it had such a profound impact in my life.
Hey, you know what? Stallions, that was going to be the football team if they got the expansion team for the
Stampede.
NFL.
And we saw, you and I covered a game in which Kurt Warner came through with the Barnstormers or whatever the hell they were called.
Yeah. I'll never forget
I don't know what it was called, but he was really good. I remember that.
When the Rams and Kurt Warner were making a name for themselves, I think I said something to you one day.
You did.
You remember we covered this arena team, the Stampede.
It's crazy.
And Kurt Warner came through, and I went back and looked at one of my old clips.
Yep.
And the very last sentence of my story said, Iowa Barnstormer quarterback Kurt Warner threw for ungodly yards.
Exactly. Hey, this is fun, man.
Hey,
thanks for
awesome,
coming in
buddy.
studio.
This is great.
Really appreciate it. You're such a great friend, and thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Danny.
You got it. And one more time, at The Athletic, you have it should be out there at any second, correct?
Yeah, it could
a new
be
article?
up any minute. And it's projecting the 2025-26 Blues roster with names like Bolduc, Snuggerud, Dvorsky, some of the guys we talked about today. It should be up at The Athletic soon.
That's Jeremy Rutherford. I'm Dan McLaughlin, and BK and Ferrario coming up next on 101 ESPN.